Hello, welcome to the Elevate Dataviz Show, episode number 3. Woo! We are here to explore current topics in Dataviz, share our creative inspiration, and the tools and techniques that we're experimenting with as practicing information designers. Today, our topic is, what do we call ourselves? Is information designers even the right word? Dataviz is a field, it's blossoming. People are specializing, companies are hiring. So, what do we call ourselves? Dataviz designers, information designers, Dataviz engineers, chart makers, chartists. What's the right thing to say?
I don't think chartists is the
No,
right thing
I
to
want
say.
that to I want that to catch on. Isn't that nice? So anyway, we are going to explore. We obviously have lots of opinions. We're going to explore the pros and cons of different titles and like why it even matters. I'm Alli Torban. We have Duncan Geere and Will Chase, Gabrielle Merite, and Zan Armstrong is our special guest today. I'm going to get back to Zan. Before we jump in, this show is supported by the members of the Elevate Dataviz learning community who get the opportunity to watch and ask questions live. Hi, Megan. Yes, chartists. If you want to watch live and comment and ask questions and elevate your Dataviz skills in a supportive community, visit elevatedataviz.com. Okay, Zan, she brought up the question or the comment or the the comment, the essay,
the provocation.
Yeah. in our community Slack, just noticing that on the Data Visualization Society survey, Dataviz survey, where it just asks people who do data visualization as part of their job, just answer questions about their job so we can see like what's happening in the industry. In the role section of the survey, it wanted you to say whether you're a data visualization designer or an engineer. And, I filled out the survey and I didn't think of anything of it. But Zan was thinking, why isn't just data visualizer? Like, why do we have to add something to the end? Like, why can't we just be data visualizers? Zan, did I TLDR your essay well?
I think so, yeah. And I think I want to be clear. Like, I don't think this is like DVS messed up in there.
No.
It's more a reflection of like, it's an interesting place where we are, where
it is
like, why isn't that a thing, and how would we call it?
Yeah, I know it is. Oh yeah, and the survey is still open right now. So
Yeah.
thanks Duncan for putting that in there. So yeah, fill out the survey. Yeah, Zan, go ahead.
And I guess the other part of that is I wasn't even clear if it was supposed to be like, which one is the modifier and which one, like, is it like when it said research, was that like, should you assume that you're a data viz researcher, or should you assume that you are a researcher who like does data viz?
Right.
So I think in some ways there was like, it can almost go, you can interpret it with the either side, that like either you assume the modifier that you're a data viz designer, data viz engineer, data viz analyst, data viz researcher, or you could assume that the other one is the noun, that you're a researcher, an engineer, an analyst who like does data viz. And I think like in the middle of that spectrum was the part where I was like, but what if you make charts? And that's like,
yeah, if you're a chartist.
Yeah. And I did a little bit of like, then I got curious. I was like, well, what does everybody else call themselves? And I looked at a number of people that I really respect. I mean, you guys as well, like this group. And then also like Adam Pierce's website, Noah Veltman, Nadi Premers, Alberto Cairo's, and some others, and kind of seeing it, Cole's storytelling with data, to see how people describe themselves. And
right.
And it just kind of felt like I wasn't consensus. And some of it also was my own personal, like, I don't know how to describe myself. Like, I always struggle with like the bio of like, what word do I use? And thinking about like other industries like photography, that like a photographer is a person who makes photographs.
I know the language just doesn't work for what we have. Maybe we could go around and say what we call ourselves, and maybe like I don't know, a few sentences about how you came to that. That might be interesting. Duncan, you want to go first?
Sure. So I call myself an information designer, and that is extremely intentional. Because for many years, I have kind of straddled this weird mix of doing data viz stuff, but also like writing and editing and just kind of like, I don't know, editorial thinking, strategy more broadly. And I kind of thought like, what is the commonality in all this stuff? And it's information, right? I take information and I design it for an audience. So information designer. Like that was the kind of easy way for me to say, you know, I do journalism, I do writing, I do editing, I do design work, I do weird code things sometimes. Like all of that stuff comes together into information. The problem I found with it is people who aren't familiar with Dataviz, assume that I am a graphic designer of some sort, when actually that's kind of like, you know, I'm a passable graphic designer, but that's certainly not a specialism of mine. And two is people are like, they just kind of like aren't familiar with this concept. Like, what is an information designer? Like, it is kind of an unfamiliar job title to a lot of people. So yeah, that's when I just kind of say, well, you can go to my website and check out the stuff I do, and I use it as an opportunity to show off my portfolio or whatever. But yeah, it's not ideal, but it feels like the best compromise that I've found.
It's especially hard, I think, with freelancers too, because it feels like you only get those couple of words. You get like 3 words to be able to instantly say what you do and what they're going to get from you, right? Will, how about you?
Okay, so my most preferred term, if I could just like choose one, like what I would put on my website would probably be visual journalist. The issue is that no one really knows what that means.
Yeah, I think I would think it was like a photographer, almost like a photography journalist.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's what a lot of people would assume, I think. And so I almost never use that in person. Like if someone says, what is your job? Like if I'm at the doctor's office, I just say I'm a journalist because, and then I, you know, can explain more if they have follow-up questions. You know, I can say I make charts and graphics and other types of stories for the news. If I'm at like a conference, what's that, Duncan?
Yeah, so I was going to ask, like, so my understanding is that the most commonly used term within journalism is data journalist. Why don't you call yourself a data journalist?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, this all gets down to like ultra nitpicky stuff that no one actually cares about. But
yeah, absolutely.
So in my mind, when I think of like a data journalist, I also use that term sometimes. Like this is the thing. So when I'm telling people, it changes depending like who I'm talking to, what I'm describing at the moment. Sometimes I'll say I'm a graphics journalist. Sometimes I'll say I will describe sometimes I'll say I'm a designer or something. Sometimes I will say I'm a data journalist. I think there are a lot of people that hear data journalist and think like what you do is research. Like you spend your time finding data sets and analyzing data sets and like, you know, which is part of my job, but like more of my expertise. That's just sort of like a skill set I need to have to do the thing I really enjoy doing, which is like designing visual things for the news. And so I try to not use that one as often, but I still end up using it sometimes. So regardless of what I describe myself as in the moment, it's almost always followed up by like a few sentence explanation of what I do on day-to-day basis. So I'll say something like, oh, I'm a visual journalist, or I'm a data journalist, or I'm a whatever. And I'll say, you know, I design long form stories for the news that use more than just words. So I, you know, analyze data, and then I figure out the best way to present that with combinations of words and photography and charts and maps and other interactive elements. So this is also a very good icebreaker. If anyone is looking for a great icebreaker, if you're like at a conference or something, or you're like meeting with a group of people that are in this field, ask this question. Just be like, so what do you do when people ask you like what your job is? What do you call yourself?
Yes.
Because everyone in this field has the same story and the same issue.
Yeah, it's hard to describe.
Yeah.
And a completely different answer.
Yes, and a different answer, exactly.
Zan?
I was gonna say, I really like the I've been struggling so much with like what is the term that I use that I kind of forgot about the like, oh, how do I describe myself? And I actually know the answer to that. So I appreciate, Will, you bringing that up of like thinking about how you tell people what you do is actually a great way to figure out how to say what you do.
Right. Yeah. How to work backwards to sum it up. Right. Do you want to share yours, Zan?
Sure. So I think I've had different labels. I've been doing data visualization since 2011. The first couple of years was as a skill that I was a data analyst. And even then, the terms were actually changing in the data analysis space, that my technical title was financial analyst. I was working on the finance team at Google. Colloquially, I'd say that I was a data analyst. And at the time was kind of when it was switching from like analysis and stats into data, like data science was becoming a term, and all of the like that space was kind of switching into data science to more fully encompass the like pipeline part, not just the statistician, like not just the analysis, but recognizing that people that were doing that job were often doing more of the full data work. And I've also seen it kind of, I think, for a long time, data engineering wasn't really like, there wasn't a term for that. And that's been a more recent term that's kind of recognizing that like, actually like that specific, the pipeline part itself is a whole job in many places. I did, as I transitioned into data visualization, I did some work freelancing with Stamen for a bit, and they use design technologist as their word to really emphasize that their technologists are doing both the design. They don't have an engineering design split. They do have some designers that are focused on design, but they also expect their engineers to be designing. So they use the term design technologist. I came in on the user experience engineering ladder at Google. So I was a user experience engineer with a Dataviz specialty. And actually kind of that was like circa 2017, went through a round of looking at job descriptions to be like, how are different companies describing this? And kind of settled on Dataviz specialist as being the most apt. And now I think I'm kind of doing another round as I'm becoming a freelancer again. I think for a long time I was a Dataviz designer and engineer to kind of show that I was doing both the designing and engineering.
Right. Yeah.
But was also felt like I was missing the analysis part, but then I was getting really wordy. So my answer is I'm still struggling with this. Maybe I'm a Dataviz analyst, but I don't actually analyze Dataviz. I use Dataviz to analyze data or analyze data with visual.
Right. Yeah. It's the words are out of order on that one.
And I kind of liked both Adam Pierce and Noah Veltman's portfolios. Basically, like I make charts, which is sort of maybe what I come back to. And in terms of how I describe it to other people, I actually think that I think one thing that's really cool is that like because of all the great communication visualization work that people are seeing that like, this group is doing, I think people tend to think of like, oh, I'll bring in a Dataviz expert when I'm ready to communicate it. And I actually work more on the analysis side. Like I want people to bring me in when they're wrestling with their data, when they don't have the answer yet. And so sometimes I have to do the contrast of like, you might have heard of like awesome Dataviz specialists for communication. That's really awesome. I do that sometimes, especially when I'm collaborating with somebody, but a lot of times I'm actually like bring me in earlier in the pipeline. You can also have a Dataviz specialist when you're wrestling with the data.
Yeah, it's harder to be like, bring me in first with the Dataviz specialist. Because it feels like a lot of times it's the ending.
Yeah. So I guess I don't have a great answer. I'm seeking answers.
Still working on it.
But I think it's, and I guess right now I think I'm also switching a little bit more into advising. So I'm like playing with the idea of like Dataviz advisor and data strategy, kind of bringing back a little bit more of the analysis part as well. So exploring and seeing how people react.
I think it's tough because, so like one of the things that you said that I think is probably the key reason why a lot of us use different terms or have no idea what to do or change what we call ourselves all the time is that problem of like, but I don't just make charts, right? So if you say like, I'm just a data visualizer, people might think like, oh, you just like work in Excel and do stuff. Or if you say like, I'm a Dataviz engineer, people might assume you don't know how to design charts, you just know how to build them. And so like, I think a lot of times when I'm describing what I do, I really go like, depending on the audience. You know, if I'm among a group of designers, I want to communicate like, I am also a designer. I'm not just like, you know, a random person who like makes charts. Or if I'm among a group of engineers, I'll be like, yeah, I also code, you know, I do that kind of stuff. And like figuring out how to get around those assumptions that like, oh, this is the only thing you do, because a lot of us are so like multidisciplinary or doing a lot of different things. Or, you know, if you're someone like Duncan, you know, like you can also do just traditional journalism and editing. And if you're someone like Gabby,
that's my background. And yeah, it kind of informs the direction that I take as well, which is kind of part of it.
Right. And like a lot of Gabby's projects are just like, some of them are purely branding and there's no data visualization involved. You know, it's just branding, traditional branding design. So.
Yeah, and I think that's tricky when you are kind of like transitioning from one kind of career area to another, and it's not like a clean break. It's like, what do you do in that gap between the two, where you don't really want to do too much of the old thing anymore? You want to do the exciting new thing, but I don't know, maybe you don't necessarily have quite a strong a portfolio in the exciting new thing. Like, you know, do you just kind of like claim to be a pro before you kind of are a pro? Like, how do you navigate that?
Well, that's definitely a tricky thing, but I want to hear from Gabby, because I'm curious also, like, maybe I'm wrong, but like I think that Gabby would like to continue also doing brand design and stuff in cases. And like, so how do you balance the other side of things where you do want to do both things at once and you don't want to like totally give up whatever your other career was and just only do like data viz or charts? And you kind of have this like dual career.
It's interesting because, yes, I refuse to give up anything. I'm like one of those. I mean, there's multiple one of those in here that refuse to give up things. I've been struggling with the name too, so I keep changing it. And I realized that just like all of you, it's interesting how when you say, this is the title I use, you precise, when I talk to those people, this is what I use. And when I speak to those people, this is what I use. And so I have the exact same thing where if I speak to somebody who's in the industry, database industry, I can say I'm a database designer, and it's really straightforward. Like they know what that encompasses pretty much. If I talk to someone who is in the design industry, then I might say, I'm an information designer. Sometimes they know. That's rarely the case. Sometimes it's more like I do like UX stuff and data storytelling, and I don't even have a title. I don't know. I've been struggling with like even switching, because my role in the freelance and at Pentagram is definitely a role where like I don't just execute design anymore. I also do like strategy and and brand identity. It's been a while that I've been doing that, but visual identity. So it encompasses so much more than just like here's data sets and please can you make a nice charts, which is what I had before. So before, for a while, I wanted to do just more like illustrative stuff, which is what is my more like editorial design, and so I called myself a data illustrator. Because when I was talking to the media, when I said data viz, they thought just like New York Times, beautiful charts, but charts. And I was like, that's not what I want to do. It needs to be illustrative. So I called it a data illustrator, which is not a word. Nobody uses it, but it works.
Really like it though. I think it's great, and it really describes a lot of your style. So why have you chosen to drop that?
Well, it's still on my LinkedIn, but I'm like, it's not like I think this was the section where it was 2 years ago, and I really, really want to get more press and media. That was my audience, which I didn't really succeed, but at least I got more work in data illustration. Like I wanted to have those roles, and I still want to have that, but I'm also moving toward a space where I would like to do a bit more than that, like be in charge of a full campaign and do the writing, do the strategy around which data I selected, and have that also like creative direction. I used to do just data illustration. Now systematically I do creative direction, then the illustration style, or the branding, then the campaign, and then the data illustration within the camp, with those brand guidelines. And so because of that, it feels too restrictive to just say data illustration is just like one section of the full character. So for a while I was playing with the idea, like, can we have like data viz creative director? Like, because that's the role.
Yeah. I think this is interesting because so it's sort of like to bridge Duncan, the last thing Duncan said to what you said is like, when you're transitioning or when you're like trying to break into a field, let's say, you want to give yourself a title that's like, very specific, I think, and descriptive. And also because at that time, you're usually focusing on like a much smaller thing. Like, Gabby, when you first transitioning into data viz, it was really like, I want to focus on like data illustration so that I can like, that is like, I can build a name for myself around that. And that's like mostly what you're doing at that time. And then like and that's a good way, I think, like to Duncan's point, I agree that you should just call yourself something. If you're trying to transition, like,
yeah,
don't wait too long and be like, oh, but like I'm so new, like I'm not like I don't know if I'm
no one's ever going to give you permission.
I know, no. Everybody put like aspiring in the front. I hate that. Like, stop that. Just say you're it.
I think it's a question of confidence too, and I could see people doing the both. Like when you go from engineering only or analyst only to like visualization, I have both. I have information designer and data illustrator because it was more complete. and reflective of who I am. So I could see how people could use both. But yeah, you don't need somebody to say like, are you a designer now or not? I don't think there's a rule for that. As long as you design and you're kind of looking for that, it's fine.
Yeah. And I really like the idea of in the transition being that's a time of being more specific, like claim the title, but be really specific about it to the part that you really do like that part you can do. And I like that idea of like, then as you grow, like kind of, I mean, it sounds like for you, like the illustrator was the part you are doing, then you were a data illustrator. And so you're able to like claim the data working from your strengths as an illustrator and really claim that. And then as you have grown in this broader space, that you're then able to claim a more broad title or like,
and it was
a really beautiful transition.
No, 100%. And it was a way to avoid, for me, it was also a way to be so specific to avoid the work I didn't want to. Because at that time, it was right after a transition. The work I was getting was very like infographic, PowerPoints. And I was like, this is fun. At first, it was great, like to start a freelance, like that's what you do. And I still do PowerPoint today. But I was like, okay, I think I need to do more. I can do more than this. So I want to make sure that if you go on my LinkedIn, it's not the first thing you see is like, I do charts and graphic in PowerPoint and Excel, because that's an infographic, like really basic infographic. And I was like, that's not, I was like, I wanted those creative avenue. So I made a point of like making very clear. And I think somewhere in my LinkedIn, there's even something that says like, I don't do Tableau. Like I don't do dashboard.
Well, and I think it's a very natural transition then, like as you move in your career and you grow, you're going to naturally do different things and sort of broaden what you do. And so I think there's some kind of like meme out there in the design community of like the more senior you go, you're like, oh, UX, whatever designer, and then this designer. And then eventually you're just designer. And like, that's everyone's title is just going to end up like all titles are going to converge on just designer. Because it's like the most generic thing you can say that lets you do
that's when you have
anything.
just like a white website with your name at the top and then like 3 pictures and that's it.
Yes, you just have exactly black background, white text that's just like Will Chase, designer. That's it.
Email me.
Email address.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I think that's kind of interesting here that is, I'd like to tease something out of something that I've noticed in things that a few of us have said, which is there's kind of like a little tension here between what we want to do as designers and what clients want from us. And I think that's an area where the job title quite often has to do a bit of lifting, because it needs to kind of shoo away the jobs that you don't want, like Gabby was talking about. But it also needs to be a marketing thing to get people to hire you for the things that you do want to do. So how do you all navigate like that tension?
Well, for me, I started out as data visualization designer, but then when I went freelance, I didn't want to be seen as like a pair of hands. Like if you put designer or engineer, it's like, okay, let me just plug this person in here and they're a pair of hands and stuff. I wanted my contribution to be like a little bit of a level up and almost like, my opinion to have more weight, not like I'm just going to be the person clicking the buttons in the tool for you. Like I'm actually going to be doing a lot of thinking. So I added consultant to the end and then data visualization consultant. And then I started
that's
getting
kind of fun because like I think a very classic thing to do is add the word consultant to the end of your job title and then add a 0 to all of your
right. Just put strategy consultant and then you're done. You're gonna make the money.
And then I started doing more like infographic illustration type stuff. And so I switched. I wanted to communicate that I wasn't just making charts. And so I went to information design consultant. But then I'm just starting to think, I'm wondering if I have gotten too far for those words to even really mean much to people not in our field. Like, what exactly are you going to be doing then? So I am trying, I don't know. I was thinking maybe going back to data visualization specialist, because specialist sounds like I have a specialized skill. Obviously the word's in there. And it's not like I'm just the person clicking the button. It's like I have some expertise that you should listen to. Maybe information design specialist. That doesn't sound as good, but
I like specialist. Specialist kind of has some like vague special forces like connotation.
Yeah.
I like it.
Dataviz
Oh, that's
operative.
too vague. What does that mean? Do you design? Do you
Specialist? Yeah. You
it's
think it sounds too
very
vague,
vague.
Abby? Yeah.
It's vague. I'm also wondering, I think also a question to me, at least in the choice and the terminology, is down to specifically, again, who is it for and where does it appear? Because the one I'm using in my LinkedIn might be different than what I'm using on my Instagram, for instance. It's just different audiences. So I wonder if also for you, for instance, consultant might be sound specialist, but your audience often is very corporate organization that you want to get hired for to give talks and workshops. And they understand consultant really well. Like for them, it's very clear what a consultant is. Whereas in a design agency, if you're looking for a designer, even a senior one or creative director, you're probably not going to hire a consultant because that sounds like strategy instead of, actually hands doing it.
And maybe it sounds expensive as well to some clients.
Yes, that too.
We were
yes,
just talking
on
about that
purpose.
at a
Yes.
zero.
Yeah, I know. Yes, exactly. So I think to your question, Duncan, like how
There's
are you
pros and
trying
cons
to
that, right?
Yeah, right. So I think if you're trying to just get some clients, maybe don't use the word consultant. Maybe be a little bit more clear on what hands work you are available for so that people know exactly, okay, she codes or she designs or, Zan, did you have something?
Yeah, I think I was saying, I think that for me, the database specialist is kind of the one that I keep coming back to because I think for me, I'm on that struggle of like on that spectrum of, or like for me, it really is the database that's centered, like more than the design or the engineering or even the analysis. Like of design, engineering, and analysis. Analysis is certainly the one that I'm closest to of those three, but that's the one that also like is the least makes sense to have in the title. Like because you can't make the database engineer, database designer, database analyst. Like the third one doesn't work.
Right.
And so I think for me, database specialist is the one that comes closest because it really does center the data visualization. And I think for me, that is a center that it really is that space of like data and visualization.
You said earlier strategist though, and I think that might make sense for you also, because when I hear strategist, I do think, hey, I need to come at the beginning. So if you said data visualization strategist, it's still a little big question mark on like what work you are actually doing, but like it does convey to me like I have data visualization specialty, but I also need to come first. So.
Yeah, this is great. This conversation solved my problem. Thank you. Because I'd kind of been using I'd been using like data visualization and data strategy. So maybe I just need to drop the middle and then push that together.
Yeah.
So thanks for watching, everyone. I think we're done here. You can all leave.
I'm glad we're able to all come together for this important moment.
Yeah. I mean, I think something that we all sort of are aware of probably is like the more senior you become in your career, the less your title matters, right? And so like, because at a certain point, people know who you are, they know what you do. And like most of your inbound work is not coming from people that are like Googling for like information design specialist, right? They're just like, they know you, or it comes from referrals, or even if you're applying for a full-time job, it's, same kind of thing. It's all due to the network. And so, it's like your work speaks for itself. Whereas in the beginning, if you don't have as much work to speak for you, that title has to do more lifting.
Yeah. And I think that's the point at which people either take two directions. Either you just go for designer, like you were talking about earlier, Will, or you go kind of like wildly off piste and pick something that is like a little bit insane. And I say this in a really, quite an admirational way. Like I really like the way Moritz Stefano refers to himself as a truth and beauty operator. I mean, like there's no other truth and beauty operator in the world. That is a unique job title. And I really respect that, but you definitely couldn't like be like, oh, I'm switching to Dataviz, I'm now a truth and beauty operator. That would be kind of weird. So there is a certain level in your career you have to get to before you can pull off something like that.
I wonder if he uses that term when he introduces himself in person, though. I have a feeling that's not the case. Like that's tomorrow.
We'll have to ask him. What do you really say?
I agree with you, Will, about the inbound and like the Google searchable and things like that. But I do think that part of the reason I feel like I'm wrestling with it is because one, for my own self, kind of reminding myself, like, what work do I want to take on? What work do I not want to take on? And like, just kind of that reflection process. And then I think also helping people make the pitch of like, and helping them understand, like, why would they hire me? And why would there be that need to bring somebody in? So I think that's where the nomenclature does feel like it still matters. And I think also just building a sense of like, I want there to be more of a recognition that this is a thing that you can be skilled in, that goes above and beyond just being part of being an analyst or being part of being an engineer, that or being part of a designer, that like there is an additional skill. And so I think that's part of why like I still I'm wrestling with the nomenclature of like how to help others understand what it is that helps them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of important as well. Like, even if you do reach a certain level in your career where, you know, it's referrals and things like that, that the person who hires you probably still has to like justify it to their boss, or, you know, make the case internally to get you on board. And you know, that's where using some sort of terminology that people are going to recognize can really help things, and people aren't going to be like, what, who is this person that you're hiring? Like,
I'm wondering if the trick to decide the nomenclature is, again, looking at audience. And I used to collect testimonial, and I always ask people, where do they come from? You know, how did they find me? And sometimes like, what were you looking for when you find me? Because that's how I realize people don't type information design when they come from, you know, nonprofit organizations and even large corporations in general. They just don't know. It's very rare that they know, except if I'm getting hired by the creative director, they may not even know. They might type UX or infographic designer. So this is kind of where I think it's like not even an SEO game, but kind of making sure that every time somebody comes in, you're like, what language do you use to define me? If they call you an analyst, maybe we don't like it, but maybe that's how they get to you in the first place. And then the title is rarely separated from your pitch 2 sentences. So maybe that's where you pile up, maybe the title doesn't matter as much as the pitch. And then that's where you use more of the descriptive of what you really do.
Yeah.
It's like the SEO name, and then your what you want name.
It's interesting that you bring up the term infographic. I think that's a really interesting one, because I feel like that is a terminology that is used quite a lot in the design world outside of data viz. But it's kind of, I don't know, I get the vibe that it's sort of looked down on a bit within the data viz community. And so how helpful is it to kind of use that, and what does that mean for your standing in, you know, in the data viz world? I think that's a really interesting question.
I think, again, like, who's the audience? Like, my audience is not the data viz industry, so I don't care. You know, it's just like, if you guys don't like it, that's fine with me. Because there's also there's a cultural thing. I think, for instance, in France, like this morning I was on a call with a client who's in France, so purely French. We have a conversation in French, and she using the term infographic designer, like that's what she knows. And she doesn't understand data viz. Like, that's not even like, we don't even, it would be designer it would be a weird name in French, and it wouldn't really make sense. I know some people use it in the French industry, in French data viz industry, but it's really rare because it's not as big yet. So it's way easier, for instance, in certain country probably to use infographics. And because they don't really understand the difference between infographic, presentation design, actual data viz design, creative direction, like they don't really understand it, certain client, then it's for some, in certain cases, it may be worth presenting yourself as it. Like I didn't mind it. I didn't get it. I didn't feel insulted. I was like, yeah, that's the term she understands. So I don't have a problem with it. And I actually don't mind even putting it on my LinkedIn if it's more as a keyword, you know, that brings people in.
People understand it. Like they really, people outside our field.
Absolutely.
And I think you're right that, if for some reason, maybe it's because people were able, like creating infographics was democratized a little bit with some of the tools like Infogram and I don't know, some of the other ones. And then people were just putting a whole bunch of garbage together. And then it was the database people tried to like separate themselves from that mishmash.
Like the Adobe stock, like infographic with just big blocks of stuff and big numbers.
We put a pie chart and another pie chart, and now it's an infographic, you know, with some icons. So I could see how the database field.
I get clients who come to me who want exactly that, you know, and
you know, and if that's what you want to do.
And some, it's not always the best solution to what they actually want to achieve, but sometimes it is. And I think it is viable to make infographics and to specialize in that kind of work. So I would like to see the Dataviz community be a bit more chill about that.
Yeah, bring it back. It is a huge. I remember looking up like Instagram hashtags or something, and then infographic and infographics. It's just like 100x what data viz or data visualization or chart or graph gets used. Like if you want to get an attention for a data viz type thing, hashtag infographic for sure.
And I mean, they'll be like literally like in Behance, for instance, they have separation for design categories like brand, editorial. They don't have a data viz category. It's called infographic. It's the keyword is infographic. If you don't put it in, you won't show up. So it's important to realize that maybe the industry has some kind of like 2010 big numbers, big icons, infographic design, but like if it brings people in, maybe it doesn't matter so much. Like it's not about our ego, it's more about like how do people find me, and then when you go super famous you don't need to, and then you can do funny stuff like truth and beauty.
I mean, maybe the kind of happy medium point is to call it an information graphic, because that to me like conveys a lot more seriousness and everything. Well, yeah, it doesn't quite have the same connotations as infographic, even though it is almost exactly the same words.
I think one of the themes I think is really interesting in this conversation is the role of like title and description as a conversation and in response to, and that it's both in this like moment in time that like I think like how we describe ourselves is like in response to what somebody thinks they're looking for and how they find us, or what they think we do that isn't what we do, and how we have to like help respond to that. So I think that's an interesting, just kind of like being really cognizant of like what is the assumptions that the other person is bringing to the table, and then how do you either reinforce or adjust those or work with those. But like I think that there's just an awareness of it's not just how you want to describe yourself, but an awareness of the larger context of what the conversation is and like what the assumptions are. And but I think also like a temporal sense, like as we think about like how does the Dataviz community, how do we self-describe? I think there's a kind of temporal sense as well of like, I think in the 80s, like Tukey era, there was Dataviz was being done much more kind of like, it was such a highly specialized thing because the tools were so inaccessible that you were in this like specialized space where maybe you were like using early computers and you were wrestling, and like Anscombe's quartet, that like the end of it, the paper that introduces Anscombe's quartet is like something along the lines of like, to create Dataviz is an act of like trouble, cunning, and something else. And it will get easier soon. Like that was the 70s. It's still hard. But also, and I think then like kind of in the circa 2011, like D3 era, like the engineering side of it, the role that like Nigel Holmes played, kind of like the Nigel Holmes versus Tufte, kind of like, is it like the kind of like illustration or the sparseness, like that, like push and pull. And in some ways it feels like we're also having a conversation with ourselves of like responding to like, oh, maybe 2011s, it was very engineering heavy of like, how do you get like how, and kind of more of an illustration time right now, or anyway, so I think just kind of that theme of like it being a conversation, both in this moment among communities and within the community among over time. It's interesting.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, like, I think we can all agree that like, titles are always made up, right? And so there's two sides of it. There's like whatever you want to call yourself, and like when you're talking to your grandma, like how do you describe yourself? That in my mind is like, that's just for you, so do whatever you want. And then there's the other side where like if you're coming from a freelance perspective, there's the marketing aspect, and we've talked a lot about that, about like how do you market yourself. But something I wanted to bring up was like, within companies, if you have a full-time job and you work at a company, a title is very important because it is often linked to how much you're paid. And so, those titles are all completely made up as well. And like, they don't have to describe what you do. Most of the time they don't describe what you do. Like if you're working at a company doing the exact type of Dataviz work, you might just be called like analyst 3. And that, so, it doesn't really matter. But, it is important to consider that like you might also be doing the same work, but if you apply for a job or like, your job title is like data viz engineer, you might be making $20,000 more than someone who's just called like data viz specialist or something, or designer. And it's same thing, if you call yourself product designer, classic meme in the community, like you're going to make way more money than if you just call yourself like graphic designer, even though you're going to, you could do the same thing essentially.
UX designer, you get paid like 50K more than a database designer.
Yeah.
And it's the same job pretty much, almost.
Yeah. So, it's something to be cognizant of, that like these things are linked to, there's a perceived value, I guess, added even for the same work, depending on the title that you give yourself.
And I think part of that is the market benchmarking that companies are looking at, like, okay, for this role, we're looking at what the market is. And so, and those have different benchmarks because of kind of what's surrounding them. And
yeah, it seems like when I was working, I wanted to lean more towards the technical skills in my title because I felt like that was going to get me paid more, having technical skills. So that's that's a good point. You want to, when you're playing the corporate game, you got to think about like market value in terms of what your title should be.
Yes, it's all very much a game. So play to your own advantage.
Well, thank you so much. A system is just as much as a game. Right?
Oh yeah, a system. That's a nice word.
Yes. The system dynamics. It feels less.
Well, Zan, I like data strategist for you. I think you should put that on and check it out for us and report back.
Yeah.
All right, Zan, I know you got to hop off, but thank you so much for coming on and instigating this conversation, because it is really important with data viz is, becoming a bigger field and more people in it. And we're all trying to navigate. And we also have that weird language barrier of the data visualization being like a noun. How do you turn that into a verb? But yeah, thank you for coming on and sharing your insight.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed this. Thanks for solving my problem. And also, I guess my last note is I think one of the reasons to have this conversation too is to kind of make the map of like what are the paths, and that there can be many different paths, and you don't have to fit like there's even within the space of data viz, there's a lot of different paths to choose from. So I hope that one of the reasons to even have this type of conversation is not just to like look at our navels, but to to kind of showcase some of the varied paths that one can choose from as you're entering this industry.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anne.
Thanks so much, Anne.
All right, Duncan, do you think you're going to change your title after this convo?
I don't think so. Information designer does what I need it to do for the time being. I mean, I think the one area where we haven't really talked about too much today, but is kind of interesting, is like how I describe the sonification work that I do. Like I kind of call myself a sonification artist or something like that, because that kind of like reflects some of the artistic end of what I do. But then, I've got the data stuff as part of my information design thing. So that's another kind of like weird thing that I need to navigate at some point. But yeah. I mean, I think also you can kind of get away with not really having a title at all and just saying, I run a data sonification studio, and I work with charts. I design charts and maps for nonprofits, or whatever it is that you say and do. You don't necessarily even need a title if you don't want to have one. If you're freelance in a professional, I say a professional environment as if freelance isn't a professional environment. In a company, as Will was saying earlier, you are forced into a kind of job title situation. And like he said, that doesn't always necessarily have any relation to the work that you're doing. But as a freelancer, don't feel like you have to have any kind of job title at all if you don't want to. If you can't think of something that encapsulates everything that you do. We've got a suggestion in the chat: Lord of Visible Sounds. I really like
that.
I think I'm gonna have that on my gravestone, if nothing else.
That's a very
he
Morris
was the Lord of Visible Sounds.
Yeah.
Rest in peace. What about you, Will? Are you going to change your title?
Well, I mean, following in Duncan's footsteps. So I think if I'm talking to like, I don't know, people that are just asking, what do you do? I'll continue to just say I'm a journalist and then explain what I do. I think so. I have given up the idea of title like on my website or something. So I'm in the middle of designing a new website, and currently my about page just says like, I'm Will, I design or I tell stories with more than just words. And that's kind of it. So again, trying to be as vague as possible.
How about you, Gabby?
I might change mine. I've been working on it for a while though. Like, what am I? And again, I think just like Duncan and Will was saying, I think it's different when you're in-house, but when you're freelance, so it doesn't matter as much as you pitch, which we might need to have a whole conversation about the pitches. But and it's actually something I've implemented a long time ago, which is my LinkedIn doesn't actually only says my title. You know how you have like your name at the top, and then usually you have like subtitle with just like, you know, I'm a brand designer, and mine actually says something like information designer and data illustrator, helping ethically driven organization uncover important truth and share stories with intention, because I wanted that like storytelling aspect to be written in. Like, even if you just look up stuff, like my profile already says what I do without even clicking into it. And I have a feeling that this might be the future, just like we'll say, where like doesn't matter what title I have, not so much. I think it might matter just in terms of like getting hired. There's definitely something about like, are you a designer or creative director? And that's 2 different rates. Right. So, and potentially 2 different jobs. I mean, they are different, but they're also related. So I might change and put more forward the creative direction and strategy aspect in the future for the bigger project, but I probably would also sell the design. So I don't know how it's going to be said. I think it might just disappear and be just one sentence.
Your title's a sentence. We got to put the verbs in there ourselves.
Are you going to change yours, Alli? Is it consultant?
Duncan, I really like the information graphics where you kind of like expand infographics. I feel like that might have potential. It's like you're taking back the infographic word. And I wonder if you put information graphics, if someone searches infographics, like it's close enough where like, no, it does. No? You don't think so, Gabby?
I don't think that's how it works. Alli's on behind, that is not how this works.
I mean, you're still going to have to use the hashtags, right? That get 100 times more views.
Right. I know. It is really crazy how much more infographics has than anything else. But yeah, maybe information graphics consultant. I don't know. I feel like information design consultant is working fine for me right now.
Yeah. I like consultant for you.
Me too.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope you don't jump that.
I'll keep consultant. I was just wondering because Timur mentioned in the Slack, he was like at Voila, they put, I think she said that they use data visualization specialist, but internally they say information designer, just because they found that their clients don't know what information designer is, and that made me think, maybe that's not good for me that I'm using information designer.
Yeah, it's truthful also, like when you search a new job, for instance, a lot of the job won't have any of those titles. Like they won't use those because they don't know what they are. So I have like some keywords thing for LinkedIn in case it's like any freelance stuff that opens, and it's usually infographic, information design, and I know the title is going to be designer. Like I just know it. Like especially those big corporations that have like those kind of grid with names, like graphic designer 1, 2, 3, pretty much, and then they describe it, and that's when you realize actually they're looking for a database designer who's only going to do report in database, but they don't have the term often.
I've seen some people use the term data designer, and like I feel like that is quite a broad strokes. I don't know, a catch-all term that covers a lot of the things that we're talking about. I design with data. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. But then I think one slightly thing about this, which I think taps into what some of what Will was saying about earlier when it comes to journalism, is that you're not always necessarily working with data, like data as in, people imagine data as vast spreadsheets full of numbers, but a lot of the work that we end up doing is not necessarily always that. Like it is more widely information. And so, it's tricky.
I've heard people say data storyteller too, but I don't think anybody knows what that is going to know what that means, like outside the field. You think?
Also, it comes down to like writing almost. I feel like then you would think you only do the writing.
Yeah, it's a little bit internal. Like again, maybe one of those things you call yourself internally. But I think to Gabby's point, that's a good point about like the job ads. So a very easy practical tip is like if you're looking for a new job, do not limit your search by the title of the job ad.
Yeah, it's really hard. finding a Dataviz job when you're trying to put in titles, because they just put in it's just all over the place and what it is.
Even in the news, I think, I was looking, even data journalists might be common in the US, but I remember when I was looking at a long time ago, 4 years ago, I had found quite a few positions actually that were doing mainly Dataviz and charts, but I think it was called graphics designer or something. It was using the term graphics, which we don't use in design industry so much. We don't use them. So it was really media. And like, you only realize that one. Yeah, you have to look at normal designer ads to then realize what's inside. So keywords is a better, it's usually more precise than the title itself.
Makes sense. Is there anything else that you guys think that we didn't cover or we should mention before we wrap up?
I think we covered quite a lot.
Yeah, we did. we solved Zan's problem of what to call ourselves.
There's only one thing is none of us call themselves data artists, and I find it fascinating. Maybe it's a whole nother story, but it's interesting how we don't use that term.
I mean, I did say sonification artist earlier, but
is that because you're still dabbling? I don't know. I feel like
in sonification, do you
mean? I know you're going beyond dabbling, but I'm saying, but it's like it's a burgeoning, is that the right word? Part of your offerings. Because I feel like if I put artist in there, am I going to get hired? I mean, is anybody going to pay me money?
So there's two reasons why I use the word artist in the context of sonification. One is that a lot of the projects that I tend to do, not all of them, but a lot of them tend to be on the artsier side of things. I will work with artists and be, help them out with the data side of things or the music side of things or something like that. And then the second is that musicians refer to themselves as artists quite consistently. And so, I'm using the word artist as in in that context, basically.
You're on mute, Alli.
Gabby, yeah, he had to run. Gabby, would you ever use artist?
I think in probably the right context, yes. When I'm applying for a grant that I delegated to artists, I might use it then. Because it's like, that's the thing that I see it. I agree with Duncan, and I feel like when you hire a musician, they call themselves artists and don't call themselves music designers.
Right. Yeah.
That'd be kind of funny though. Where like in our industry, I think, again, design and art is, in my opinion, not that far away from each other, even though some would disagree, but it's really important when you're looking for grants, what title you are. Are you an organization? Are you an individual? Are you an artist? Or are you like a designer that has like a studio? And so I think artists might help with this kind of, applications when you have to do this kind of,
I think, that's definitely true.
Yeah. When I hear artist kind of like in a corporate organization setting, it's like, are you actually going to solve a problem for us? Or, they just,
or are you going to make problems for us?
Yeah, I don't think I can use that with my client. They're going to be like, oh man.
Yeah, you sound flaky already. I don't know.
Yeah. But if you want to do things like Dataviz on like clothing, on music, on like those like really like creative avenues that are not just like solving somebody's problem, like communicating an infographic, or then it might make sense. Like I'd love to, we talked about making like exhibition, and I think a designer so much that you are an artist if you're making an exhibition.
Yeah, for sure.
Might be an assumption too on my end, and I'll have to like research that.
One title that I really like, which isn't quite Dataviz, but it's sort of tangential to it, is creative technologist. That's I really like that.
I've heard.
Gabby's shaking her head again.
I like hearing it, but it doesn't make me think of it.
I hate it. I
don't know what you do.
I feel like people who do that are like people who want to like do fun code stuff, and they like refuse to have. But sometimes it's like unclear what they do, and I'm like, I'm really confused when they use that. I'm like, who? Like it's like people who are like evangelists. I'm like, what does that mean? First, why is it a religion?
Yeah,
and then
evangelist I think is a completely different thing to technologist. I think you're conflating two things that are
sure. It goes in the realm of like undefined for me. When I see this, I'm like, I have no idea what you do, and for me, as someone who's like maybe looking to hire or just cruising portfolio, I'm like, well, I don't know what you do, so I just don't want to hire you because it's very unclear. Yeah, I'll just be like, bye.
Yeah, it seems like to be a creative technologist, you kind of have to be at a company, and it's like, okay, they know what you do, so that's okay. So I can call myself that.
Or you have to be in the position where you have like you are well known for your work already, like we were talking about.
Right.
Earlier.
I think just dabble in a bunch of stuff.
You see a lot of new kids being like,
Duncan.
You see a lot of
sorry. What was that, Alli?
I was just saying you could be a creative technologist soon with all like your dabblings of sonification and stuff.
Yeah,
like
I mean, maybe
fingers in a lot of different things.
I don't know. I think I would need to have much better code skills than I do at the moment.
Why?
Call myself
There's no
that,
definition
probably.
of creative technologist.
That's true. That is true. What were you saying, Gabby? Sorry.
I wonder if it's a thing of, like refusing the label, which I understand and I share. I think it's impractical if you're going to have a business, but I could see the appeal. And I just wonder also when you say creative technology, I also think like in our industry, we interpret it as like you coding, but what if you're not? What if you like actually build machines? That's technology too. Like, my partner is an engineer. Can he be a creative engineer if he makes creative machines, like creative technology? Like it's just, it's too blurry.
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is very broad. It is very broad. I don't think I would use it, but until I get like super famous, right? I can just call myself whatever.
I think I'm just going to go back to Lord of Visible Sounds.
I know.
I really like that.
That was great.
Please change your LinkedIn today.
In perfect time for Halloween. All right. Well, thanks everybody. That was great. Thanks for the people watching live. And we will catch you in about 2 weeks for our next episode. All right. Thanks everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.